higher dimensional aspect through my friend, Kelvin Chin. So Kelvin is an author, teacher, and a guide. He is a public speaker and a meditation teacher. He's the executive director and founder of turningwithin.org and the Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundation. But Kelvin actually has several foundations. He has helped people in many different ways to live more effective and enjoyable lives since 1970s. He's the author of Overcoming the Fear of Death. Marcus Aurelius Updated, which I love these books. You can see I've posted notes in everything, in every book. And the book that we're going to probably center a lot of the talk on today is this book, which is his newest book called After the Afterlife, Memories of My Past Lives. And in this book, he'll explain his recollection and his mapping of 6,000 years of his lives. So with that, Kelvin, welcome.
Great to be here again. Great to be here again, Kathy and Bob and Noel, everybody. Yeah.
So Kel, how do you want to start this? Sometimes I do have a list of questions I can bother you with if you want.
Well, you can always weave those in, you know that.
Okay, okay.
I think when I was talking to Noel about this, I don't know, recently, what we would want to talk about tonight. I'm going to talk about something a little bit differently. Yeah, I think you're right. We'll focus on the third book, this one, the Afterlife. But I want to focus on an aspect of the afterlife that a lot of people wonder about, and that has to do with how do we recognize our loved ones, our family, our friends, our people? How do we recognize other souls when we don't have a biological body anymore? So we'll talk about that. That's one part of it. So in other words, in the afterlife or heaven or whatever people call, the afterlife after we biologically die, how do we recognize people, beings who we knew? And then the other part is, how do we recognize them after they've incarnated into another physical biological body in a future lifetime, in the next lifetime, even the next one or the next one after that, or whenever, any future lifetime? How do we recognize our soul family, our soul friends, and etc., soul acquaintances? there's all different, kind of concentric circles of friendship that we have with people. So I think that, first of all, let's talk about one thing, just to clarify. When we biologically die, my experience personally over the last 50 years that I've been having these experiences like this is that we continue, that our mind, our soul, our spirit, our consciousness, whatever you want to call it, continues. I'm in 68 countries now, working with people in 68 countries. So I tend to try to use easy to understand English, because sometimes English is the second, third, or fourth language. So you'll hear me often use the word mind, but I'm not just talking about the little mind that's playing with his hands right now while he's talking on a Zoom call, or the mind we use to focus driving the car down the highway and looking through the windshield and all that. That's part of our mind. But when I use the word mind, I mean that plus the vastness of our mind. So you could substitute soul or spirit or consciousness or awareness. It's okay. But that continues. That's that aspect of us that continues. And I think that's a reflection, a demonstration of the first law of thermodynamics, which says that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. It takes on a different form, but it will continue. Energy will continue. And I think we are energy. Our body is energy. It tends to be a more slower vibratory frequency than air, for example, is vibrating at The molecules and the atoms are vibrating at a different frequency than our physical bodies are. Our mind, our energy, I think, is also energy, and it's obviously vibrating at a different frequency than our biological body. Do they influence each other? Sure. The mind and the body influence each other. But when the biological body ends, it turns out the machine that this is ends its functioning finally in that lifetime, our mind continues. And then, so then how do we recognize beings on the other side? There's a phrase that I use that I call it, we are still an identifiable energy pattern. We don't merge with any energy force. We don't merge with God, if people believe in God. We don't merge with God. We don't merge with the universe. We don't merge with anything. Merging means losing one's identity. That's what merging means. A lot of spiritual groups and spiritual teachers don't understand the term when they use it. Merging does not mean connection. We connect with each other in a lot of different ways. We don't lose our sense of individuality, our sense of self. We remember who we are. So when we die, same thing. We remember who we are, who we were. We don't merge and lose our identity. That's what the phrase merging means. It means lose one's identity, lose one's individuality, don't know who you are anymore. Okay? So we still remember who we are. Who is the medium, the psychic medium talking to your dead relatives and loved ones and so forth, if they don't retain their individuality on the other side. So we have an identifiable energy pattern, which also means that phrase that I came up with, identifiable energy pattern, means what? That means that we can recognize each other. That means, Kathy, when you die, or Noel, or Bob, you know, we'll recognize each other on the other side. It's almost like energetically we have like a transponder. People who know anything about aviation, every airplane, every helicopter, every vehicle in the air has a transponder. And once assuming the transponder is turned on, it's an electronic device that's turned on in each of these vehicles flying around in the air, these planes and helicopters and whatever. That's giving off a signal that any radar in the world can pick up, and that in that radar screen will show that specific vehicle's identifiable energy pattern. It literally shows up on the screen as a K123XY478, whatever. I'm just making up a number, but that's what will show up on the screen, and that's identifiable to that particular vehicle. I think it's very analogous when we die. We don't have a number, but we have there's something energetically about us that's still identifiable to other beings, other people who we've interacted with before. There's also identifiable traits, we'll call them, of that individual that continues after we biologically die, for example, that are more mental, that, for example, somebody has a really great sense of humor, or somebody does not have a very good sense of humor. You don't all of a sudden develop a great sense of humor when you biologically die and go to heaven, all right? You still have your own personality traits, whatever they are, when you biologically die. That's my experience. I just had a visitation, well, just 2 years ago. That's recent for me, because this has been going on, remember, for me for 40, 50 years. But a couple of years ago, a very close friend of mine, Phil, died. And he came and visited me, and he did, and because of his goofy sense of humor, I knew it was him. I knew exactly that it was Phil. And I said, "Is that Phil? Is that you?" And he did the same thing again, like right after I asked. It was Phil. That's his personality. So we can recognize these things. Another way we can recognize is visually. Sometimes some of you, I know some of you, because I know, having talked with some of the people who are in this group right now, about your own personal experiences. I mean, and feel free to share it when we come to the Q&A. Have had visual experiences of seeing a dead loved one, your grandfather, who you really loved, and getting a message about, for example, I think one of you told me, I think it was your grandmother had a nickname that you had never told. And yet in your near-death experience, I think one of you told me that she told you that nickname, or maybe it was the grandfather who told you that nickname of your grandmother, and you came back and you told your mother that, and your mother said, "What? I've never told you. You know, nobody ever told you that." So those are kind of examples of identifiable, either personality traits you want to call them, or kind of identifiable traits that a mind, a soul, a spirit, a consciousness can communicate with us and let us know that that's them. That is that person, okay? Or that, that energy of that person who's no longer a person anymore, but they're a mind, a soul, their spirit is continuing. So that's one way of looking at that in terms of on the other side. What about in future lifetimes? Same, very similar, more from a personality trait standpoint. So what kind of personality does the person have? There are many stories, there are many documented stories of children coming back, for example, sometimes coming back very soon after they've died. I'm talking about a child, let's just say 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and tragically dies in an accident or an illness, comes back to the same family sometimes. Not always, but can choose to come back very quickly to the same family, like 9 months later, literally. And it's in the identifiable, how can you tell if it's the same child? Well, one thing physically that sometimes happens that's been well documented is the child, before he or she dies, has injured him or herself on the leg or the arm or something. Maybe they fell riding their bicycle or something, or they're whatever, playing with toys, and they get cut, and they have a scar on their arm or their leg or somewhere on their body. They die, and then the next being, the next baby, the next infant that's born into that same family has the exact same a birthmark that has the exact same shape and location and everything that the scar of the previous child had 9 months or a year or 2 years earlier when they died. And moreover, an even further, I would say, clear kind of corroboration that it's the same soul in a different body is that they got the same likes and dislikes. They don't like the same Disney movies. They like the same Disney movies. They got a favorite G.I. Joe character or whatever. They dolls, toys, food. They like certain food. They don't like certain food. That kind of personality trait, you could call it, continues. And we can see that in adults too. And so we don't always recognize them right away. Like my daughter, tell a story in my third book about my daughter has been my sister in another lifetime and my daughter in another previous lifetime previous to that. She's been my daughter at least twice, maybe 3 times. And she was my older sister, my current daughter, who's now 29 years old, Sam. She was my older sister 250 years ago when her name was Wilhelmine in Prussia. So we figured that out separately, somewhat separately from each other, and then kind of triangulated and followed some breadcrumbs and figured that out. So I think those are just to kind of cover the topic, and we can open this up to questions, and we can talk about anything about afterlife or past lives stuff or NDEs or anything in a minute. But that's the kind of the overview of the 2 areas I wanted to cover that Noelle and I talked about before. We scheduled this. So questions, open it up to lots of stuff.
Well, I'll just try to coordinate it a little bit for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
first, I do have a question that I think could add some insight to this.
Yeah.
Why do you think that the game of life here is that you forget everything, and then in your case, you were able to remember? Why do you think it's set up like that?
I don't think it's set up like that. I don't think things are set up. I don't think there's set up. I think there's choice and free will and how you are wired. What do I mean by that? Some people are very, very fearfully wired. What's called it? I'm not saying they were pre-wired that way. I'm saying that that's how they developed over millennia, over millions of years. I'm talking about even before you were human. Okay.
Mhm.
Who knows what we were before humans even maybe existed? I think we've existed. If the soul is eternal, that means no beginning, no end. That means we manifested as a, I don't know what, we don't have a label for it before humans existed, you know?
Right.
So I think over this huge period of time that each of our souls has been around, some people have developed a lot of fear. And I think that's a big block, big block. So you want to say that's kind of patterned that way? You want to say it's set up that way? You could use that phrase loosely, but I don't think it's like somebody external has set up, okay, nobody's going to remember stuff. No, I think it's some people can remember. Why can I remember and why can't a lot of people remember? Why can my kids remember some stuff and other people can't? I think it's because we don't. I think there's two basic reasons. I mean, there's probably a million reasons, but I've kind of distilled it down to two things when people ask me this. One is I don't have a fear of death. And the other is I don't have a fear of embarrassment. And I mean,
That's,
I
yeah.
don't mean that lightly. I mean that seriously.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are worried about what other people are going to think about them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most people are walking around with that, whether they admit it or not. And I've got to the place where, I mean, and I think I was a little bit more like that when I was younger this lifetime, but now I'm like, it's like, I don't care if people believe me or don't believe me, what I'm saying. That's not the point. The point is, I'm using these as teaching tools to help people reduce their fears so that they can live life more in a joyous way in the present. It's
Right.
the past life stuff is kind of irrelevant. It's really about what it has taught me about myself and the universe and other people and other beings, et cetera, et cetera. And then how do I adjust my choices that I make in my daily life so that the alignment of my desires is more, it leads to more fulfillment of my desires. That's to me what happiness is all about. That's what, to me, if you want to talk about what's the purpose of life, that's the purpose of my life anyway. I mean, I don't know, some purpose of other people's life sometimes is to make other people miserable. That's not, there's people like that. I've worked for people like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
Well,
I'm not judging them. I'm just saying that's a fact.
well,
But
I think part of the reason why you and your family and possibly a lot of your acquaintances in this lifetime are aware of their past life and their past life connection to you is because of the meditation work you've done and the meditation work you continue to do. And you guys, if you haven't taken Kelvin's meditation class, you want to, he makes it so easy. And the field is palpable if you're sensitive at all. It's quite remarkable. But I would gather that silencing the mind and letting the whole essence of yourself be centered and calm could really make a difference. Do
yeah,
you
the issue
agree?
is
Noelle,
not.
are you gonna say something too?
Oh, go
Yeah,
ahead.
but I don't want to interrupt when,
I'll just say
That's
one thing and then Noel, you can say something. So
okay.
the issue there is how do you do that without trying to quiet your mind? Because everybody tries to quiet your mind. You can't quiet your mind by trying to quiet your mind. So anyway, that's what I teach that's the technique. But anyway, go ahead, Noel.
Okay. Um, Carolina had a question when you were talking earlier about, the transponder, we'll say on the other side, how you can identify, would you call that frequency? And then I also had a question that someone sent to me ahead of time. And she says she wants to know the difference between spirit, energy, and vibrations, because, she feels they kind of get, she's just starting to go beyond her Catholic upbringing and is kind of like gets confused with how different people use that. So,
Right.
between those two questions, if you could
Sure.
shed some light on that. And yes, I do want to take the meditation class.
You can do that. So
All right.
what Carolina's question was about the transponder thing. Does she have a specific aspect of that? The identifiable energy pattern question?
I'm going to ask her to
I'll
unmute.
let her write that in. Let me to you, and then you can ask me. Let me answer the other part. So energy, mind, soul, what was it? Vibration, I think.
Yes.
The way that I distinguish those, though, to me, I understand how people could treat them synonymously, but the distinction that I make is there's energy that can make decisions. That's what I call mind. And then there's energy that cannot make free will decisions. Free will just means decisions, choices, okay? But when you hear me use the word free will, I'm not using it in a moral authority way. In religions, sometimes you'll hear the word free will thrown around, and they mean moral authority. Who has the moral authority to decide this or this? That's not what I mean. When I use free will, I simply mean it in the simplest English definition of choice. Do you have a choice to do something? And do you have a choice to not do that same something? You have the choice. So to me, I draw a distinction between any vibration, to use that phrase that person had written in the question. Vibration to me is inanimate. But do minds have vibrational qualities? Yeah. But I don't see a mind and vibration as exactly the same thing. Does that make sense, Noelle? I'm not sure if the
yeah, I was just trying to get that into the chat. So mind, let me
yeah. So mind is something, the soul, mind, soul, spirit, whatever. Those are synonyms in my
okay.
lexicon, my dictionary. Mind, soul, spirit, consciousness, those are synonyms. And the distinction between that and energy or vibration is that the mind, soul, spirit, consciousness can make decisions. It has the ability to make choices. Energy, inanimate energy, I consider inanimate. So one's animate, that's mind, soul, spirit, consciousness, make choices. And the other is inanimate. It's like, is this glass made of energy? Yes, it is. Can this glass make a choice and all of a sudden not be a glass of water and just be a television set? No, it can't do that. But it is made of energy, and it's vibrating at a certain frequency, et cetera, that's measurable and so on and so on, right? But it doesn't have a mind. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't have a the glass does not have a consciousness as defined by making a decision to be something other than what it is, can my mind change my body into something else? Well, I can't change it into a horse, but I can change my clothes, and I can change the temperature of my body by taking a shower or going in a hot tub or whatever. They're taking a cold shower. I can do things like that. A glass of water cannot make those choices. You see the difference, right?
I'm seeing the difference, and that's good. I mean, your mind can change your body from healthy to unhealthy.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
It does that quite frequently. So we do have some additional question here from Carolina. When you say we have like a transponder that is unique to us, it makes us identifiable from the other side, do you mean it's like a unique frequency? Like, I know it's my dad because it's my dad's unique frequency.
Yeah,
So
the short answer is yes. The longer answer is I'm using kind of analogies here, Carolina, to kind of describe something that's it's more abstract than that. You know, I mean, there's stuff about your dad that's unique about your dad that you're going to know that I wouldn't know. And whatever that is, that's what I'm talking about. So fill in the blank of that. What's that called? So this transponder idea and this frequency idea is kind of what I'm referring to, but it's even more subtle and more nuanced than that. Because if I had your dad, it's not like if I had your dad's frequency, then I would recognize it was, that's too superficial. It's more subtle than that. I hope that helps. It's more personal than that. All right.
Okay, so I would like, if people haven't read this book or don't know about this book, I would love for you to talk a little bit about this timeline of past lives.
Oh, yeah.
So, and then I have some questions about it, but
Sure.
as you see this timeline, if you guys can see there's a timeline till 1943 from 4000 BC.
Yeah.
So that's where Kelvin is using his knowledge of remembering and struggling to remember and process everything and put it in this book. That's where he's giving you the authoritative answers, is from this experience, from being able to recall that.
Yeah.
So do you want to share a little bit about
Sure.
any
But
of this?
let me make a comment about authoritative. I don't consider myself an authority. I consider myself someone who has had lots of wild experiences, and then I've interpreted them. And I
Right.
say that in the book, that these are my interpretations of, and this is, I say this in all my classes. Those of you who've taken my classes, you've heard me say this, that I view myself as a teacher. That means I share experiences and interpretations and perspectives and approaches and ways of looking at stuff with people, but you guys have to figure it out yourself and take what makes sense that I say and throw away the rest, or put it on a shelf and look at it later. Because each of us is involved in a personal self-development journey. We forget the fact that it's personal. Don't just blindly follow what somebody else told you, if whether it's me or anybody else. So I just wanted to comment on the authority phrase that you used. So yeah, my memories go back 6,000 years, 4,000 BC to about, well, to present. But my past life, the last past life, I died, I think, around early 1943 or the end of 1942. It's not real clear to me, but I think it was the Battle of the Guadalcanal in the South Pacific in World War II, when I was a World War II fighter pilot. Most of my couple of dozen lifetimes of memories are of people that I don't know the names of. And, they're just regular people like all of us. And there's a small handful of 4 or 5 different lifetimes where I remember being people who are known historically. Now, I think that's happened with a number of people. I'm not the only one. But what that has done is it's allowed me to look at my personality traits that I've been alluding to in previous discussions tonight, through a long lens, and through different lenses over a long period of time. And what that has done is it's helped me, at least about myself anyway, learn more about myself. And then I've extrapolated from that, and maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, about that I think that this happens to a lot of people, that we have our personality traits that we tend to carry around with us for many, many lifetimes. And for my students who I've worked with, that seems to be the case. Those students of mine who remember some of their personality traits and who they were when and so forth, and what they were doing in 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago or 2,000-3,000 years ago, that personality trait continuation seems to be the case. And so the timeline that Kathy just shared with you is of about 24 different lifetimes from over the 6,000-year period. What else do you want to ask me about that, Kathy?
Well, I guess I wanted to make sure that people understood that this is a deep dive. I mean, one thing you said was that you're not worried about what anyone else thinks. but that this deep dive and you explaining it to people without any care if they get it or not, or ridicule you or not, I found that quite amazing. But I also, you had mentioned at the very beginning that you're going to be speaking on Easter, and one of your lives you were Simon Peter. And so I thought that might be an interesting, if you want to share how you and George
Yeah, how
kind
that,
of figured that out, that's a great story for people to help them understand your journey in remembering.
yeah, so that one gives a bunch of different, also the William Baldrige part of that story.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So the way that happens was, first of all, you got to understand, I didn't believe in past lives. I didn't believe in reincarnation, and I really didn't believe in heaven or an afterlife. So that's the frame, that's the foundational belief system that I came from, that I grew up with. Even though I went to church, I went to church because my parents told me I had to go to church. You know, I went to Sunday school. That's why I went. So in 1977. That date is important. So in 1977 is when my past life memories opened up. But the first experience I had was not about a past life. Well, I didn't know that it had anything to do with past lives. It was a nightmare. I had a really, really bad dream, but it was a lucid dream, crystal clear, colors, saw myself, had, what I was wearing, lying in a ditch. I was crying, emotionally very distraught. And I could feel the grit. It was a whole bunch of sensory experience along in that dream too, not just visual, like my usual dreams had been, but sensory. I could smell my sweat. I could feel the grit of the sand that I was lying in, there on the side of the road, in my mouth, because anyway, very, very clear bad dream. I thought it was a bad dream. I didn't believe in past life stuff. When I'd hear people in the TM organization talking about it at dinner and lunch and some of these meditation retreats I go to, I just chuckle. I just thought, man, these crazy people. So, but George and I, my friend George Hammond and I were on an extended 2-month everyday meditating all day for 2 months meditation retreat in Switzerland, and with about 75 other people in the hotel. And we were doing group meditations twice a day. And then we were in our rooms the rest of the day meditating and so forth on our own. But twice a day we had a group meditation, and we would sit on the floor on this foam colored, just covered floor, just foam mattresses, just wall-to-wall foam mattresses, sitting there and meditating, group meditation, fairly long group meditations. And we were doing energy movement work as well. And in the middle of one of those, I flipped over on my back. My feet went over the back of my head. My back went down just completely involuntarily. Energy just pushed me back. Some energy within myself pushed me back. And my arms went out to the side, and I was being crucified upside down. And so, I was experiencing the emotion, the pain. It was very sensory and emotional experience, physically painful, etc. I was reliving it. And so George and I were out for a walk. Everybody on the course regularly, we went for walks after lunch and dinners to get some exercise, besides doing the yoga we were doing in between our meditations and stuff. And we went for a walk behind the hotel, two of us, and I started to tell him about the dream that I had, the nightmare I had about 6 or 8 months earlier. And I just told him something very superficial in the beginning of the dream, like I had a really upsetting dream. And then he finished the dream for me. He told me what I was wearing, where I was on the side of the road, how I was emotionally feeling. And I've never known George to thought of him at that point in our 20-something year old lives to be psychic. But so I didn't think he was reading my mind. I was like, how did you know that? And he said, well, I was there 2,000 years ago. I'm the one who found you. So and he said, you don't know who you are? And I said, no. And so George grew up, Catholic, altar boy since he was 8 years old, et cetera, Catholic schools and so forth. So he knew the Bible inside and out. I didn't. I did, like I said, I went to Sunday school because I had to. My parents made me, and I didn't really pay attention. And so he said, you know who was crucified upside down? I said, no. And he said, Simon Peter was crucified upside down. So then I relaxed into this experience, which was continuing every time I closed my eyes, every time in the group meditation. This went on for the whole 2 months. And it went on for, I can't remember, 6 or 8 months or a year after that, from time to time. But it went on every time for 2 months at that meditation retreat. I'd flip over my back. And so I relaxed into it, just allowed it to happen. I didn't resist it, like I was probably resisting it a little bit initially. I relaxed into it because it's not a real pleasant experience if you haven't figured that out. So I relaxed into it, and the energy started moving through me more fluidly. And all of a sudden, I got all these flooding memories of being with Jesus and this and that, and conversations and being by the campfire and Mary Magdalene and you know, being with John and James and all these other teachers and so forth and so on. And by the way, there were women and men. You know, who wrote the Bible? Bunch of guys. So why do they just talk about guys and they don't mention Mary Magdalene very much, right? And you know, hello, a little bit of bias there, okay? So I started remembering all this stuff, and George and I started talking about this. We didn't share this with anybody else. We didn't share our memories with it. We didn't think we were going to start talking about it. I didn't start talking about my memories until 2018. 6 years ago was the first time I started talking about this. We just figured, you know, this is our personal stuff. Why do we need to tell anybody else about it? They're going to think we're nuts. That's what George and I agreed. But we would share it with each other. And then every once in a while, I'd have a girlfriend or a wife. I have had a couple of wives. I told them because, you know, I got to be full disclosure. So, you know, it's going to come out at some point. And my kids, of course, have known, et cetera, et cetera. My kids have grown up knowing about all this stuff. So that was an unusual outside corroboration, George. And it's saying that to me in 1977. In 2020, I had a separate, was surprising, and quite frankly, it was a shocking level of surprising to me in 2020 when I met this guy named William Baldridge on Facebook. He Facebook friended me because he also used to be a meditation teacher in the TM organization in the 1970s, but he was on the West Coast in LA and Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. I was on the East Coast. I was in New England, Connecticut, and so forth, Washington, D.C., teaching meditation. I never met any of the people on the West Coast who taught meditation. The same group, same organization, never met them. He told me 4 years ago that there was this guy in 1973. So when did I have my first past life memories? 1977. So 4 years before I had my first memories, there was this guy named Charlie Lutz, who was a leader in the TM organization, who I didn't know. I never met him. He died about 25 years ago. Never met the guy, never heard him speak, who was talking about my lifetimes. And he was referencing that there was a TM teacher in the organization in 1973, and I was a TM teacher in 1973 in the TM organization. And he referenced a TM teacher who was both Simon Peter and the Prussian king, Frederick II. And so I had memories of being a king of Prussia in 1978, 1979, but I didn't know which king of Prussia until 2014. I figured that out. That's a whole other story. But look at the timeline there. This was complete outside corroboration by somebody who was considered, I guess, within that aspect of the TM organization as very psychic, this guy Charlie Lutz. He was about 30 years older than I was. He was 50 when I was 20. So, but he was in charge, he was head of the spiritual regeneration movement, SRM, which was obviously the spiritual side of the TM organization. I was in the science, education, teaching businesses, corporations, and professional athletes side of the TM organization. We had nothing to do with that organization. Can you imagine a business inviting us in to talk about past lives and stuff? No, that's what that guy was doing, this guy Charlie Lutz, with that part of the, you know, interest group of that part of the organization. So he was talking about my lifetimes, and that there was a TM teacher. He didn't name me, but he said there was a TM teacher who was these two people in a prior lifetime. And he said he was saying this in public lectures in Los Angeles in 1973. And I had William Baldridge check with his friends who were in the room when Charlie Lutz was asked these questions about, he was asked, is there anybody now who walked with Jesus, I guess is the way the question was asked. And he said, yeah, in fact, he's a TM teacher, and this is who he was. And in a subsequent lifetime, he was also Frederick the Great, or Frederick II, a king of Prussia. I always thought, until I heard this 4 years ago, that it was really odd that the juxtaposition between those two lifetimes, right? But yeah, outside corrupt.
Wow, that was perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what I wanted you to share. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question was, because we're coming up to Easter, is you had experience with Jesus.
Hmm.
Do you want to share a little bit about that? Because well, I have a specific question, but I don't have to ask it that way. Because you had a different experience than maybe what's been given to us in the Bible.
Yes. So yeah, I have all kinds of different experiences, and that's from what's stated in the Bible. But ask me your specific question, and then I'll jump.
Okay. Okay. So the question I had was, what was the thing that has upset Jesus the most about how his life has been used?
Oh, okay. That's easy. That's an easy one to answer. Okay. The thing that upsets Jesus the most about how his life has, his story and so forth has been used is how Paul created Christianity, the religion of Christianity. Jesus did not, Paul did. I talk about this in some length in my past life book. But the short version is, that's the most disturbing thing to Jesus, is how Paul made Jesus's death and crucifixion a part of this myth that Paul created, that Jesus died on the cross to save everybody else from their sins. That is a Paul created story. And if you read even religious historians, not people who are have a religious agenda, but if you read a religious historian who's done the research of the original documents by Paul, written in Greek, his letters, etc., in ancient Greek, and the ones who can read ancient Greek have interpreted those, and they've corroborated the fact that Paul created Christianity. Jesus did not. And this notion of he died on the cross to save everybody else from their sins is absolutely the thing that bothers Jesus the most. And it bothers Jehovah, quite frankly, too, because Jesus and Jehovah had and have continued to today, to this moment, a very, very, very close relationship, as close as father and son, closer than the closest father and son. And in the Bible, there's some stuff in the Bible that is accurate, and that the capturing of that relationship between Jehovah and Jesus is accurate, very, very close. And the reason it bothers Jehovah so much is that the notion that someone that he loved so much, Jesus, as if he was his son. He wasn't his son. Jehovah has never been in physical form, we don't think. So, but as if he was his son, he loved him so much that he would kill him and put him through so much suffering and physical torture, is just anathema to both of them. That's clearly the answer. I know that absolutely the answer to that question, Kathy.
Yeah, that's a very, everything I read that lines up. And, what people don't realize is that Paul never knew Jesus.
No.
He didn't come around to what, 50, 60 years afterwards. And
about 3.5 years later, Paul came to us and said, hey, he's going to stop killing and persecuting. He literally was killing. He was responsible for killing Jesus's some of his teachers. I know who Stephen is today. Saint Stephen, those people who know anything about the Bible, and Saint Stephen was the first.
Do tell.
He was the first teacher who was, murdered. We'll call it what it was. Murdered, by and Paul, Stephen, I can't say who it is. I don't out people until they're ready to speak publicly about who they are. I know who a number of the original apostles were, and Mary and Miriam and so forth, and Stephen, but I let them speak when they're ready to speak. But he has told me he has explicit memory. This is the person in the 21st century, I know. He has explicit memory of seeing Paul sitting on a stool, gloating, leaning back on a stucco wall as Stephen's being stoned to death. So obviously, sometime after that, Paul had his vision and so forth, and maybe he did have a vision from Jesus, and it would make sense to me that Jesus would say to Paul, "Why are you killing my people? Why are you killing my teachers?" But the whole crucifixion and dying for people's, everybody's sins and so forth, Paul completely fabricated that. That's a complete derailment of Jesus's teachings. So,
right. And I also read in your book you mentioned about Mary Magdalene, and we're going to have a guest on April 11th, and she studies Urantia, and she brought through a book is about Jesus's the female counterpart to the apostles, that he had a evangelistic corps of women that were nurturing, that took care, that healed. Are you?
Yeah,
There were women.
Yes, there were women who were teachers. The Urantia book is channeled through angelic minds, and the angelic minds. And I'm not a Urantia book expert, but I've read enough of it to know. And George and I have read enough. George has read a lot more of it than I have. He's probably read the whole thing, but it's very clear to us that it's channeled through angelic minds who want to have this. They've created a kind of their own religious notion of Jesus, and so, and then they've said that Jesus said this and that and so forth, and there's stuff in there that's clearly not said by Jesus, but that they say is said by Jesus. But whatever, the issue there to me is, you got to think about it. We were a bunch of people trying to help other people. We weren't there creating some evangelistic core of whatever. It wasn't this organized thing. It wasn't like they had this corporate structure, and it was a bunch of people who wanted to help other people. I mean, you gotta realize what it was really like on the ground. It wasn't, oh, Jesus is coming down and he's organizing this thing. No. Jesus didn't really find himself, to be honest, until he was done taking care of his siblings. So there's another notion out there which is, if those of you who've seen the 30th November talk, you know how silly this notion is, but that the people think, oh, but the what do they call it? The lost years of Jesus, when it's not in the Bible, as if the Bible is some historical biography of Jesus's life. No, it's the lost years, the stuff that they don't talk about when he was a teenager and he's in his 20s until he started going out teaching. What was he doing? He's taking care of his mother because his father died. So he was being a responsible older son in the family, as a carpenter, making stuff so that he could feed and house his mother and feed his young siblings. Okay, brothers and sisters. There was a bunch of them. And so once he got older and they got older, now they're in their 20s and he's 30-ish or something. they can start taking care of mom and each other and so forth. And that's when he started to go out and teaching. But he already knew how to meditate. He didn't have to go to India to learn to meditate. He didn't have to go to Egypt to learn some esoteric, mystical stuff. He already knew that from being on the other side with all of these seers, Jehovah, Shankara, who was Vyasa, who wrote the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita and all. He's hanging out with all these guys. This is a small group of spiritual leaders, we'll call them, seers, teachers, who have been incarnating at different times. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when he was John the Baptist, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi when he was Elijah, the prophet Elijah, before he was John the Baptist, et cetera, et cetera. So they all know how to meditate already. So he didn't have to go someplace to learn. He didn't have to go someplace to people. It's kind of strange to me because people revere Jesus so much, especially in Christianity and in spiritual groups, and yet they treat him like a dummy. Like, oh, how could he know how to meditate? He must have gone to learn from some Indian guru to meditate. What? This is Jesus we're talking about. This is an evolved spiritual being. Right? I'm sorry, I get a little excited about this. But it's like, we meditated with him every day. That's what seeking the kingdom of heaven within means. It doesn't mean go to some place that's heaven that people think is a place. That's a place you go after you die. But seeking the kingdom of heaven within is that place within you, which is your heavenly foundation, you could call it. I'm using this very figuratively speaking, which is your expansiveness of your mind. That's what I teach people to do. I call it turning within, right?
Mhm.
Does that help?
That does help, but I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay, so was Jesus in a scene? Would he have come through that lineage? And that may be a ridiculous question to you.
Again,
but,
yeah, no, well, yeah, I don't want to judge people's questions because I understand everybody's coming from a heartfelt, good place. Okay.
absolutely. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so I'm not judging in that way. That said, people are looking at Jesus in this very linear, oh, he must have gone to learn somewhere kind of thing. And and to me, I find that demeaning, to be honest. That's why I get a little excited about it. It's like it's demeaning to my friend Jesus. It is. It's like, oh, well, he must have gone to kindergarten's religion school somewhere, No, he was born with this knowledge. Now, did he remember everything? No. Do I remember everything from all my previous lifetimes? No. That's what I'm trying to teach myself, is to remember more. I mean, I'm serious. That's my takeaway from having all these memories is to want to remember more in my future lifetimes. Okay. So did he remember everything that he had discussed? I can't speak for him on this, but if you had me to guess, I'd say no, he didn't probably remember everything that was discussed with the group on the other side before he incarnated when they made their soul plan. But, because, and the reason I can conjecture about that is that John the Baptist and Jesus took a while for them to meet. But I know that John the Baptist and Jesus were part of the soul plan on the other side. There's a whole bunch of us were. But I didn't remember, when I was born, and goes to Kathy's earlier question about, why don't we remember? Who knows? We're focused on feeding ourselves. We're focused on learning how to walk. When you're a year old, our minds are occupied with some real functional, environmental, and logistic physical stuff. So, but so I know that it took them a while for them to meet, and they were even cousins. Their mothers are cousins. Elizabeth and Mother Mary was, they're cousins. Elizabeth was John the Baptist's mother's name. But still, it took them a while. It took them decades for them to actually meet. They saw each other. I remember, I can't remember if it's either Andrew or or John the Baptist himself, or one of them told us that how my brother Andrew or somebody told us, or maybe it was James, but one of them told us that when they saw each other, because John the Baptist baptized Jesus. Jesus was in this long line of people, I talk about it in my book, waiting to be baptized in the river by John the Baptist. And when they saw each other eye to eye, it was like their souls as if recognized each other, you know. But anyway, did I answer the question? Enough?
Did you answer the question? Yes, your emotion spoke volumes. So I'm just going to tell you, there's a movie out that's going to drive you crazy.
Oh yeah.
Christspiracy.
Christ what?
Christspiracy, by the same people that did Cowspiracy and Seaspiracy. And
Oh, yeah.
it's a whole new look that what happened, what Jesus did in the temple and why he did it. And basically you come out saying, of the movie saying, oh, Jesus was a vegan. And that's what what was going on.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
you'll get a kick out of that.
Yeah, I'm
But
sure.
if you get this riled up about Paul. But anyway, it's interesting. I do want to put it, Kathy, I don't know if you want to join in here. I do want to put it in gallery view and ask people to turn their videos on and
Okay.
open it up for a Q&A now.
Yeah.
If you want to talk, just let me see. Right now, I'm going to make it so that you can unmute yourself, or you can just wave your hand if you want to have some interaction with our esteemed guest here, Kelvin. And we're all esteemed guests when we really, comes down to it. We're
Absolutely. Yeah.
and while we're waiting for someone, I'm just going to share what Jim shared. He said, after my son passed away, my wife, daughter, and I were driving in another state on vacation.
Mm.
What occurred is that we saw a car that had a license plate as Casper.
Mm.
Casper was our dog's son, which is now our dog.
Mm.
To me, that was a message from my son. No question in my mind that he was reaching out to us.
Yeah, I
And
agree. I agree with, was it Jim said that? Is that right?
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. You
Mhm.
get these messages and they're personalized, you know? And when they're so personalized, I think it's pretty clear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anyone that would like to chat with Kelvin while we have him here, or share an experience, something that aligns, or questions?
Mm.
You're more than welcome to.
I have more if no one else does, but let's
Karen
give somebody
just
else a
muted.
chance. Hi,
Yeah.
Karen.
Hi. Yeah, I'm loving all of this and trying to like put this succinctly. Like in some ways, I really understand the vibration print that you talk about. And in many ways, I don't. Yet what I find fascinating is I love these Thursday calls and I haven't been available to get on for quite a long time. And I really came on because I'm with my 93-year-old parents and my mom almost died a few weeks ago, but I guess she decided to stay. So she's getting a lot stronger. So I came because of the title, about afterlife. But what fascinates me is I had a friend, Mary, that Bob and Noel know very well, that I studied and worked with for 5 years under a spiritual teacher. And we were initiated in transcendental meditation with Paul Mueller Ortega. So what I find fascinating is Mary and I were walking through a farmer's market one day, and I said, we need a sign. We need to come up with a sign so that we can all recognize each other when we come back. And we laughed about it and we talked about it. I don't know if you remember that or not, Bob and Noel, but we were like, we need to do this. So just the fact that that happened, I'm on this call tonight with Bob and Noel. You're bringing up the transcendental meditation. I was initiated by Paul in TM. It's like the vibrational soul tribe. It just pulled me in, like, to come to this. And so I realize like I'm sort of saying something and not saying something and saying something all at the same time here. And I find it fascinating. I can't remember, but 2 nights ago, I had a dream, half awake, half asleep, of the reason why Jesus died on the cross, and it had nothing to do with saving sins. And I can't remember the reason, the detail, like I was just trying to recall it as you were talking. So I also find it fascinating that, I mean, I haven't thought that for 58 years. I grew up in the Catholic Church. I haven't had that thought. I just had it 2 days ago, and here you just said it out.
Wow.
So whatever's happening, something's percolating.
Interesting. Yeah, a couple of comments. One is, I think that I don't know about you, and I can't speak to you specifically and personally, but I know that a lot of people who were attracted to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, especially in the early days, from 1959 into the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, and maybe even to present, but especially back then when 20,000 people a month were learning. That's when I was teaching. It was crazyville. I mean, 20,000, that was just the United States, not the rest of the world. Just in the United States alone, 20,000 people a month were learning. And so that's how I could teach 1,000 people before I was 30 years old, you know? And a lot of people were attracted to him, I think now, because of his John the Baptist lifetime. I think many of them were followers of John the Baptist 2,000 years ago. Some of us moved from John the Baptist to studying with Jesus when John the Baptist was beheaded. And I don't know about you, let me see if that resonates or not with you and your friends or whoever, but I have seen that play out with a number of my old TM friends. A number of them have had some awareness and some explicit, like the person who was Stephen, remembers, you know, Maharishi, et cetera, knew he was John the Baptist before it was publicly known that he was John the Baptist, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one thing I'd comment. And the other thing was, what was the last thing you said about, after you started talking about TM, what was the last thing you said?
I mentioned that a few days ago, that I had this awareness of why Jesus died. It had to do with something I was reading with the Joseph communications.
Yeah,
and I don't. Like, that's why Jesus died on the cross, not that he died for all of our sins.
Yeah, well, he definitely didn't die for all of us. That's definitely a Paul created thing, and that's historically known. Of course, it's not taught by the church, but because it doesn't serve the church. But Paul, that's definitely Paul created. I don't know. There's no reason that Jesus died on the cross. I mean, people think that there's a special reason. The reason for those of us who were there and are horrified, and including those who were there, who I know they are today, who want to have nothing to do with any of these discussions that we're having tonight, because they're still traumatized by what they saw and what they remembered from then. And so one of the things that I'm doing is helping people get over that trauma. And I'm not talking about 12 people. I'm talking about 1,000, 1,200 people. I'm talking about 2,000 or 3,000, 4,000 people were aware and traumatized by. I talk about seeing some of these people in the streets. I talk about this in my book, seeing them in the streets, people who never were with him in a room, or, you know, but were traumatized by this horrific event. And the reason was a combo platter of the Sanhedrin priests being ticked off, that mainly a power play, that they're worried that he's going to take away their power base, and their power base means money, and they're all into power and money. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And you got to understand, there were 40, 50 Sanhedrin priests. There was a lot of them. It wasn't like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 you see in some of the movies. There's what I would call a board of directors or a board of governors or something, loosely speaking, I would say that, there's like a small group of them that were, I don't know how many, 8, 10, 12 or something like that out of the 50, who were like the real senior decision makers. But I know who one of them was, one of the 50, one of the low, we'll call them lower level, junior level Sanhedrin priests, who tried to convince the others to not crucify Jesus, not murder him. And he's carried that around till he died in 2015, and Jesus came and visited him before he died. And I don't say this in my book, but I'm going to tell you guys, since it's a small group of people, I'll tell you who it is. It's in this book, my Overcoming the Fear of Death book, in the NDE section, where I talk about J. I don't mention his name, but I can say his name now. He's J. Peters, died for 20 minutes in a Seattle hospital. 20 minutes. Those of you know anything about healthcare, you die for 4 to 6 minutes is usually the max. That's it. 4 to 6 minutes. And if you come back after 4 to 6 minutes, you very often have brain damage or something. It's 20 minutes. And my friend Diane, she has her own visitation story in the appendix, because I put in its appendix separate from, because it's so long. Her visit from her father, I think it's 12 pages long. It's in the appendix of this book. But she was sitting next to Jay. They were very close. She and her husband, Ray, were very close with Jay. Jay literally, because he was somewhat infirm. He had a bunch of different, I think he had type 1 diabetes, and he had a bunch of other different complications since he was 11 years old. But he had this NDE when he was, I think, 54 years old in 2004. And Diane was sitting next to him in the hospital room. And I've talked to his doctors and had dinner with his doctors since he told me this story, and so on and so on. So I got it from different people. I know he died for 20 minutes. But here's the part that's not in here. He was a Sanhedrin priest. That's not in here. That's not in any of my books. Jay was the Sanhedrin priest, one of the Sanhedrin priests, to try to convince the other Sanhedrin priests to not kill Jesus. And he carried that guilt around with him for 2,000 years. Jesus came and visited him before he died in 2015. But the other thing that I don't say in this book, I described the NDE in some detail in here, but I left out the fact, and you know, you'll see why I left it out. I teach from a non-religious perspective. I teach across all religions, including people who are atheists and agnostic. Doesn't matter. But what I left out of this is that when Jay came slamming back into his body from being in outer space or whatever heck he was, he sat up in bed and yelled, "Diane, where am I? And what are these people doing here?" He completely spaced out. He didn't know where he was. And he saw, this is the part I left out, he saw Jesus standing behind Diane, floodlit, like all lit, like his whole standing. Yeah. And after that, he asked for his pen and paper with crayons or something, and the nurses were, and he drew, Diane told me, I don't put this in the book either, Diane told me he drew pictures of exactly what he saw.
Wow.
And he kept showing everybody who came in. They probably thought he was nuts. But, you know, he kept showing every doctor, every nurse, every, you know, technician came into his room after that. He showed him the picture of what he saw, of the picture of Jesus. And this is what I saw when he came back. And everybody thought, yeah, right.
Wow.
So Jesus died because of the Sanhedrin priests and because of Pontius Pilate just washing his hands of the whole thing, you know, the figuratively speaking, washing his hands. Pontius Pilate was a mean kind of guy. He was not a real lovey-dovey guy. You know, he just did not want any trouble. That was his job as the Roman prefect, the governor in Judea, is to not have trouble. And the guy before him was really mean. I think I saw something, I read something, I think the governor before him, 50 crucifixions before Pontius Pilate. So Pontius Pilate, yeah, so he was a little bit tamer than the other guy, but the previous governor, but he was not a real lovey-dovey, touchy-feely guy. He was like, just, you know, he was a Roman, it was very military minded, you know, keep Judea calm, no fights, no, you know, they didn't want an insurrection. And so that's why he said, you know, yeah, take him, you know, you want to kill him, you know, get rid of a problem. That's why he died. You know, and the other, that it was because he started gathering people. And the other thing about miracles, the thing that I find very ironic is that that's the part that most people discount. They say, yeah, the Bible, yeah, maybe it's not all there, but the miracles, forget about it. Who can do miracles? He actually did miracles. He actually could manifest. He actually could manipulate energy because it's energy. This book is in energy. Now, I can't manipulate this book and make it into a glass of water, but he could do that. So that's the irony we find, that those of us who have memories of this, is like that he actually did turn water into wine. He actually did make the fish like a gajillion fish. He could actually do that stuff. But the problem is, and it took Andrew a while to convince me, my brother Andrew, back then, and I agreed with him eventually. But the problem was Jesus got frustrated with people. They were not listening to his messages about turning within, about seeking the kingdom of heaven within, and about being more kind and loving to other people and not being so knee-jerk to kill people, et cetera, et cetera. They were not listening to his messages. And he got frustrated with that. And then the crowds dwindled. They get down to like 20 people. You know, it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And then it's like 20 people, 50 people, and then it's 20 people. Now it's 10 people in a little room talking to him. And he got frustrated with that. And then he started doing miracles. And guess how many people showed up? But why were they showing up? They were showing up to see the miracles. And it was frustrating for him.
Okay, I would like to suggest, I'd love for you to end this on a really upbeat way,
Yeah.
where, if possible, that there's been many times that I've talked to you where you've said something about people feeling like right now this time's one of the toughest times and that
Yeah.
everything's difficult. But really, because of your perspective of humanity, could you talk about this time frame that we're in?
Yeah, I think we are in difficult times. There's no question about it. The autocracies around the world, not just in the United States of America, the right wing and left wing, the extremist groups are getting a lot. They're very vocal, and they're getting a lot of traction around the world, not just in the US. So yes, challenging times, absolutely yes. But perspective, we need to remember, not that long ago, I do the math not in my books. Actually, it might be in one of my books. It is in one of my books. It's in my purple book. There's an essay on this in the purple book, Marcus Aurelius Updated, where I actually did the math on this. But not that long ago, in the Second World War, I think it works out to something like, I can't remember, it was 30,000 people a day dying. 30,000 people a day dying. It worked out to around, I think, 70 million people died in 6 years. So you do the math, 6 years divided by 365, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Whatever that number works out to. It was not that long ago, in 1939 to 1945. That's how many people were dying in that war around the world. So I'm not saying it's, I'm not denigrating, I'm not demeaning the fact that when 25 people die or 50 people die in a horrific shooting or whatever, it is horrible. It's terrible for one person to die in a violent way, in my opinion. That said, we got to keep perspective, and we lose perspective so easily in the 365, 24/7 news cycle. They keep recycling stuff, and you hear the same thing over and over again. I tell my students to not watch so much news.
Right.
It's not healthy. It is not healthy. It really isn't. You get a warped perspective, and there's so much disinformation on the internet now. You get a really warped perspective on life in the universe and on planet Earth. Another thing is, you think about how many people die a violent death today compared to not that long ago, just several hundred years ago. Several hundred years ago, 1 out of 5 people died a violent death. Violent. Like, you'd go to the bar and you wouldn't know if your husband or your wife is coming home from the bar with a screwdriver or a knife or some stick through their eyeball into their brain because somebody got drunk and ticked off at them. It's not just in wars. There were plenty of wars and battles going on too. I mean, but we forget, and now it's like less than 1% people die of violent death today. It's really switched around. I mean,
when I talked to you before, you brought up the Marcus Aurelius times of when you think of the Rome, how Rome conquered all of Europe with swords and spears and everything compared to now.
yes.
That you, at least that's why I was hoping to leave it on a pleasant
That was
note.
very
Hey, maybe we aren't as violent as we were, hopefully.
but we're not as violent. That's the thing.
Yeah.
We think we are because of the news. We are not. There are not. I mean, it was no big deal to see 5,000 people dead just in the Civil War in somebody's cornfield. You go back to ancient Roman and Greek times, and when the population of planet Earth was a small fraction of what it is today, with 70,000 people dead in the Battle of Cannae.
Yeah.
70,000 people in a 5-hour period. 10 or 20,000 people was normal back then. And that was
Kelvin, do you take this as evidence of we're evolving?
yes. I think we are learning. Maybe slower than what a lot of us would like, but yes.
That's why I was hoping you would end with this, that there's hope for humanity.
There is hope. There is hope. We're moving in a positive direction, and we need not. And let's talk about the planet. This is another thing that I say to people, because it's like people think, well, are we going to blow up the planet and not make the planet uninhabitable, and then what's going to happen? And I say to people, look, I don't think that that's going to happen. If my crystal, don't put any money on my crystal ball, but I don't think that that's going to happen. But let's say worst case scenario, it did. We'd go to another planet. Would it be a pain in the neck? Yes, we'd have to figure out wheels and this and that, and you know what I mean? Have to invent stuff and figure out gravity and so forth and create a civilization. But we are eternal beings. That's the positive note I want to leave everybody. We are eternal beings. Our soul, our spirit, our consciousness, whatever word you want to use synonymously, is no beginning, no end. And we will take on a different form, maybe even than humans. Who knows what? But we will not lose our identity. And
That's interesting.
Hopefully the core group of us will learn from our mistakes.
Yeah. And if you get this book, you'll see Kelvin remembers being an alien too.
Yeah, I have a lifetime on another planet. I have a memory being an animal. I'm sure I've been many animals, but I have explicit memories being an animal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelvin, and everyone that came. It's just been a really great turnout, I think, and I'm just so grateful that you share your wisdom and inspiration. You've given me some wonderful new things to think about and put into to explore. And I know that's what a great teacher that you are. That's the greatest gift you could give to someone is to help them explore a little differently and think about things a little differently.
Exactly.
And
that's my objective, is to help people explore themselves and explore their thinking about the universe and the planet that we live on and relationships that we have, maybe in a different way than they have before, and maybe in a way that helps them live life with less suffering and more happiness.
Perfect.
That's
beautiful. I'll close. Daisy says, "Blown away, thank you." So I think that's a great way to end. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we did put your contact information. Do you have another meditation class coming up?
Yeah, I have. I do them monthly, meditation class, and you go on my website, turningwithin.org is my meditation website, and you go on the register page, and you'll see the calendar, and you'll see how many seats left I have in a given class. I have lots of seats in my June class. I think I have 1 seat left in May, and I'm taking names for waiting list for my April class, and March is full. So, but I also, since you mentioned this, I do a free monthly Q&A open forum on the 30th of every month on Zoom, and you have to register it for it once, and then you keep using the same Zoom link. But it's not the same Zoom link as my meditation classes. So it's a unique
Okay.
Zoom link. It's open to the public worldwide on the 30th of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern time, 12 p.m. Pacific time, etc. And it's just every month, and it's open forum, and people can ask questions about anything. So there's one happening, what is it, a couple of days from now, right?
Yeah.
So you just
It is.
you can register, find the link either on my Facebook page, you can find the event link, or you can find, or my website. If you're not on Facebook, then go on my website, kelvinchin.org, and you'll see a page that it says 30th monthly Q&A page, and you can register there. I also do a 6-part series on afterlife, which is more organized because it's 6 parts, but 2 hours each session. And I've got another one starting May something. I can't remember if it's May 12th or so. I think it's May 12th. I have another one starting, and I do that about 2 or 3 times a year. And it's more organized. And if you go on that same website, kelvinchin.org, you go on that page and you'll see a preview of me talking about for 15 minutes what I cover in that.
It's
So
wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kelvin. Really appreciate it. Just a joy to have you here. Always welcome back, of course. Thank you, Kathy, for
Sure.
bringing Kelvin, and we'll see you all next week. Actually, we will have someone talking about the Urantia book.
Oh, happy
So-
birthday, Bob.
Happy birthday, Bob.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for the birthday gift of this evening together.
Yes,
great,
wonderful.
great.
Love you all. Good
Love
night.
you. Good
Night.
night. May peace
Thank
prevail
you.
on earth.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Bailey. Thanks for coming. Thanks, Jim. Thanks for coming, everyone.